Okay, I'm going to assume that the people who were waiting to join us have now joined. I'm sure there might be some more that come along the way, but let's start for those of us that are ready to go. So my name's Alice Payne. I'm from the College of Legal Practice. I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today. Taking the time out over your lunch break, if you do have a lunch break, to just consider how we can help those that maybe find it harder than others to enter the legal profession. Feels like a really important conversation this week. It's Social Mobility Day in a couple of days' time, but it's an ongoing conversation that we have at the college. As you may know, the College of Legal Practice absolutely has some really big goals and aims around increasing the access to the legal profession and supporting students to go through the SQE who might not otherwise be able to do so. So it's something that we're really passionate about. And we're very proud to partner with quite a number of organisations who also share that passion and that commitment. So it's something that was really important to us and something that we wanted to share and wanted to bring a panel together to talk to you about today. And onto the panel. I just think that this panel is absolutely fantastic. We've got lots and lots of different experience and background on here, real variety as well of experiences to bring to you today. I will ask for introductions in a moment, and I'll just do a bit of housekeeping before, but we've got Tom, Alice, Puneet and Jane to join us and to share their experiences. So just quickly, just a little bit of housekeeping. We have got the chat bar, as I said. Please feel free to pop questions in. We have got a lot of questions that you've already submitted, so we can't promise to get through them all, but we'll try and leave time for questions at the end. It should be about an hour. We have closed captioning on. Anyone who's having any problems in terms of accessing this and listening or watching us, please, if there's anything else that we can do, please let us know. And we'll also make sure that we can share a recording with you at the end. But stay with us because the engagement would be really fantastic, and we'd love to hear from all of you in terms of your experiences and what you'd like to ask the panel as perhaps questions get prompted in your minds. So let's start. I think we're going to start with some introductions. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself and say why you wanted to join us today?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Alice. So I'm Tom Lyas. I'm the head of resourcing and co-lead for social mobility at the law firm Browne Jacobson, where I've been for 7 years. First time I've been in the legal profession. But yeah, just delighted to be here today, certainly on talking about obviously Social Mobility Awareness Day on Thursday, but actually making a week of it. So yeah, something that's incredibly passionate and close to the heart.
Thank you. Alice?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm Alice Kinder. I am an employment lawyer. I'm a senior associate at Bexley Beaumont. I'm also the vice president of the Birmingham Law Society, where I chair their social mobility subcommittee. And I'm a social mobility ambassador for the Law Society of England and Wales. So passionate about this on lots of different levels. Social mobility is something I've had my own personal experiences of entering and progressing in the legal profession. And it's a conversation that I think is important and that I'm really excited to contribute to.
Thank you. Puneet.
Hi, my name is Puneet. I'm the Senior Manager for Strategic Development at Rare. So Rare as an organisation are a diversity consultancy who focus on social mobility and race. About 50% of our client base are law firms, so we work with about 83 law firms. So on a professional level, delighted to be here as that's our area of expertise. On a personal level, prior to joining Rare, I was a graduate recruitment and development manager in the legal profession for more years than I probably care to remember. And when I started in the early 2000s, social mobility wasn't on the agenda in the way that it is now. And so for me, it's a really interesting reflection to look back over the last, 15 to 20 years at how that journey has progressed to the point that we're at now.
Thank you. Jane?
Hi, thanks, Alice. So I'm Jane Waddell, Head of Curriculum Design and Development at the college. And as you know, we're very committed to making everything as accessible as it can be, from pricing through to how we deliver. And like Puneet, I've been around, I practiced for a lawyer for a very long time and have been around for a while and have a lot, even more longer period to reflect on. So I'm really curious. I have my own views, but I'm also very curious to hear everybody else's and see how it fits in.
Thank you. So to help structure today and the panel session, we are looking at some aspects of the Social Mobility Employers Index, which is run by the Social Mobility Foundation. There are a number of stages of the whole recruitment process that we're going to go through. And we've also looked at all the questions that those of you that have joined us submitted when you registered, and I will ask those along the way to the panel. So we're just going to run through a little bit and think about some of the statistics around the legal profession specifically. We'll look at outreach and work with young people and attraction, then very much focus on the recruitment selection process, and going through to the impact of SQE and development and support. So we'll try and take you through those different areas to help structure the discussion. And I guess the main focus for us is really thinking about those young people from those low socioeconomic backgrounds who maybe perhaps are much more limited in those choices and those opportunities that they can find to enter the profession, to enter the legal sector, to enter education, and really trying to hear and understand from the panel practical examples. That's what people have been asking for, practical examples that different firms, different organizations can put in place, often without significant resources or funding, just to help make that journey possible, easier, more attractive, more of a reality for those young people. So just to start, Puneet, do you have anything to share with us about what you're seeing in the legal profession in terms of social mobility at the moment?
Sure. So just to give this a bit of context, so I'm not just making up numbers, one of our big pieces of work is to do with the contextual recruitment system, which is a platform that gives graduate employers more context about people applying to them. So when someone submits an application for a vacation scheme or a training contract, they answer some additional questions around where they went to school, some of the questions that you would regularly see around social mobility, things like eligibility for free school meals, and this provides some data points to people like Tom who are reviewing those application forms. That platform's used now by 82 law firms across the United Kingdom. So what we're able to look at is across those firms, what does the demographic of the applicant group look like from a social mobility perspective? And so what we're seeing is that for law firms in the United Kingdom, about 36% of applicants are what we would refer to as social mobility candidates. We measure that looking at socioeconomic background, which is things like eligibility for free school meals, whether you were first gen, personal background, which looks at time spent in care, refugee or asylum seeker status, and whether you were a carer parent. And then the last is educational disadvantage, so how good or bad was the school that you attended. And so 36% of applicants are coming from one of those backgrounds, which I think it's higher than a lot of the other industries that we work with, to be honest. And I think that's testament to, when the legal sector says it wants to do something, it puts its heart and soul into doing that thing. And I think the sector has got something to be proud about. Like I said, it's an interesting reflection for me to think back to pre-2015 when Rare launched the system, but going back to pre-2011 at how far that, that journey has come. So I think the sector is doing incredibly well. I do think what's interesting though is we measure that scale of social mobility from 0 being no disadvantage to 5 being the most disadvantaged. And in the last year, there were no candidates who applied who had the highest level of disadvantage. And what I mean by that is these are candidates who would have had to gone to a bottom 10th percentile school, had spent time in care, and had some economic disadvantage, so whether that was eligibility for free school meals or working a lot to support themselves. And so we didn't see anybody applying from the top 2 levels, if you like, of social mobility disadvantage. So that's just another interesting data point. But overall, more than a third of the applicants are coming from these backgrounds now, which I think, from an attraction perspective, shows we've come a bit of a way down that journey.
Thank you. And today's about sharing some positive, aspects of this in terms of what's working as well. Mm-hmm. And there are quite a lot of evidence to show increasingly that there are initiatives and activities that will work and will make that difference. So it's good that we can focus on those as well. Thank you. Alice, from your perspective, from what you see in the firms that you're working with or that you are part of the Law Society, what are you seeing from a social mobility side?
First thing really to say is that the profession is changing. I mean, when I started law school just over a decade ago, the concept of social mobility, the idea of people coming from different backgrounds was very rarely spoken about. And I remember often having discussions with fellow students about whether firms might prefer one Russell Group university over another one. And I remember doing application forms where I was asked who I knew at the firm. And that was quite a common question. And I think now, particularly over the last 5 years or so, the majority of firms are now alive to the fact that things need to be done differently. And I think things like the idea of recruiting solely from certain universities is viewed as unacceptable across the board. There's lots of investment into outreach. There is lots of investment into recruitment processes, which can take away elements like where someone went to school or their background. So I think there's lots of change. I think that's very positive. And I think this is very much on the agenda in the firms, certainly that I am seeing. But what I would say is it doesn't mean we're there. I mean, I think a lot of the work that has been done is at entry level. And even if diversity is growing there, it's not necessarily translating through into those senior ranks. There's been some research, I think it was last year, that said on average, people from a lower socioeconomic background take 1.5 years longer to reach partnership. And there are still lots of barriers in terms of knowledge, understanding of how the profession works that potentially not everybody is going to have the same awareness of. So I think, yes, there's been lots of change. Yes, that's very positive, but we're only one step there, is what I would say.
Yeah, thank you. And it'll be good to reflect on the progression and how that is taking shape towards the end of the panel discussion. So let's make sure we come back to that. Thank you, Alice. So where we're going to go now is we're just going to think about the outreach work. So right at the beginning of a young person's journey through to hopefully entering the profession. And actually, not surprisingly, 70% of young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds see the cost of living as one of the 3 most important issues facing the country, and nearly half of them listed it as a major personal worry in a recent survey. So it's absolutely the top of their list, as it is for many families, in terms of a concern and a worry for them. Tom, in terms of your experience either at Browne Jacobson or elsewhere, how can we do that outreach work for sixth formers and school leavers to make that opportunity to give them the exposure to the legal profession to make it possible for them?
It's a really good point. So I think from our side, I mean, we've been very successful. We had started the sort of digital transition, if you like, pre-COVID. But obviously COVID really accelerated because clearly we couldn't go anywhere for a period of that time. But actually the reason that we'd started to sort of change our approach to outreach, and rather than specifically go to individual university schools, colleges, actually we sort of felt, well, you know, we are a very small team. I mean, our firm is 1,100 people now. You know, going back 3 or 4 years, it's probably 800 people. My team are just 4 of us. So it is a very small team. What we decided is we would put on, instead of going to individual schools, colleges, universities, as I said, and doing their careers events, we were like, well, actually, we'll put our own careers events online and we'll invite everybody. So that way, you know, certainly targeting social mobility cold spots. I think if you have budget, and you don't need a lot of it, this is one of the things I'm kind of keen to really sort of get across during the hour that we have today is, you know, a lot of the changes you can make don't require significant financial investment. If you can partner with somebody, we chose to partner with someone called Young Professionals, company run by an entrepreneur called Dan Miller. What Dan does is he has over 4,500 schools on his database, you know, has 50,000 plus student followers. And actually what we could do with Dan is put events on at real scale, which meant that not only were we able to target schools far beyond our geographical reach, and I think that's one thing that sometimes employers do fall into the trap of. It's like, okay, well, we're in Nottingham, Birmingham, Manchester, London, let's just focus on those on our doorstep. And that will hold you back. So we took a UK-wide approach, you know, Ireland, Scotland, you know, Wales, etc. within that as well. But But I think, you know, putting on the scale, the virtual events is really key to being able to broaden your reach. I think having an external partner will do something which is very difficult to do yourself, which is actually get the data of the attendees, so the demographic data. We know on average, you know, 62% of the students who've attended our events are, you know, Black, Asian or ethnic minority. 52% are from a lower socioeconomic background, because that's the areas that we tried to target. But I think, as I said, you have to, for us, what we did is we took an industry-wide approach as well. Bizarrely, one of the best things we've ever done to attract people to Browne Jacobson was not talk about Browne Jacobson. It's a really strange thing. What we did is we put on events that were very inclusive. So we had barristers' chambers, we had in-house lawyers, we had other law firms to really showcase this is the profession. And actually, I think that approach to just saying, look, we're really happy to help you get into the profession has actually shown us to be a very inclusive law firm. So I think I wouldn't fall into the trap necessarily of just talking about yourselves, talking about your local geographical areas. You know, if you take a really holistic, broad approach, you'll be amazed at what that can open up for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Jane, do you have anything to add in terms of how we can help increase access without increasing costs for students who are interested in looking to engage with the profession?
Yeah. So my starting point for all of this is it's about confidence, and it's having the confidence to attend the events, having them on your radar. Work experience is something that a lot of firms offer, and that seems to put in students. And one of my thoughts on that is it probably needs to be bite-sized to draw them in. Can they afford the time? Do they have other jobs? I mean, a lot of even school children have other jobs factoring it in. And one of the messages that comes out from firms, even if they're not saying it directly, is a lot of these work placements come over as very competitive. And I would question whether that's actually the messaging you want to be giving, as opposed to giving them an opportunity. So perhaps a bit of work to be done around the messaging.
Yeah. Anything to add, Alice, Puneet? Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's some of the practice as recommended from the Social Mobility Foundation, as well as very much looking at reducing those costs and increasing the access and the opportunities through virtual engagement, virtual work experience, virtual opportunities, Forage as well, in terms of another platform that will give free access to experience and understand different aspects of legal skills and the profession. It seems to be definitely the way that in which we can help everyone, regardless of their kind of background, as you said, or location, Tom, start to engage with the profession at a very early stage. We're going to think through into routes into the employer. So just for those who are less familiar with the index, and I'm definitely learning about it myself, this is about I guess some parity there in terms of law graduates and graduates, I should say, not law graduates, graduates and non-law graduates, and also just thinking about how structured it is and how accessible the law firm actually is when students start looking at and potential employees start looking at your firm and how you're actually positioning yourself and appealing to them. Alice, in terms of how do you ensure you're accessible law firm? That was a question that someone asked. So from a routes into the employer perspective, what would you be hoping to see?
Yeah, interesting question. And I think it's one that's very broad. I think I would make 2 points. The first one, which Tom has talked about in detail, is start from the very beginning. So make sure you are aware that social mobility starts young, that how somebody grows up, where they grow up, can have a huge impact on the opportunities that are available to them. And as Tom says, it doesn't need to involve lots of budget or a big D&I team. There are lots of charities running programs that you can partner with. Think about your approach to work experience. So where you can, try and organise those structured programs, because I think we really need to move away from work experience being based on people that you know or someone that you know passing a CV around, because that is going to create barriers. And think about how you can go to the people that need those opportunities. So Tom's talked about this, about doing events online, which can tap into some of those social mobility cold spots where people may not be able to access the locations where the firms are based. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is just to assume nothing. So just because something has been done a certain way, or because the legal profession has always operated with certain parameters, doesn't mean that everybody knows that. It doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way. So think about your messaging on your websites. Think about how you advertise and where you advertise. Oh, sorry, something's just popped up on my screen.
Apologies, that was me. Sorry to stop you in mid-flow, Alice. Keep going.
No, yeah, think about how you advertise and where you advertise, and don't assume that everybody knows where these opportunities are available or what they involve. So it's important, I think, on your websites to be setting out what you're doing from a D&I perspective, even if it isn't a huge amount, even if you are limited on resource. Setting out that it's something that's on your agenda, I think, can be very important in making those opportunities inclusive, and include videos, content from people that work there, because that can certainly, I think, help to make those experiences more relatable. Certainly from my perspective, when I came in to do vacation schemes, assessment days, actually talking to people that work there and thinking, well, actually, they're not too far from me. We've got quite a lot in common. It really can help bridge those gaps. I can see Debbie's made a comment, work experience is a big hurdle. Yeah, lots of firms are hesitant to offer work experience programs. Now, I, as a student, participated in a first year work experience, which was a year before the traditional vacation scheme assessment period. Now, it was sort of a mini vacation scheme, I suppose, a shorter, I think it was a few days or a week, where you got a taster of what the law firm was like. I think the benefit to doing that really is in terms of raising awareness that people who have been on these work experience schemes will know, first of all, that's a firm that they're familiar with, and also they'll get that insight to be able to think, okay, well, I'm going to apply for this firm. It's one that I really want to work at. And you find that often that loyalty will build up at an early stage. If there is a firm that's helped a good candidate, they'll apply. And when there are so many vacation schemes and training contracts and opportunities out there, being able to get in early and helping those good candidates see what you've got to offer can be really valuable. And even if it is just a day or an evening, just an insight of a bit of shadowing, perhaps hearing from some trainees or graduates that work at your firm, I think that can be really helpful as an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And in terms of video content as well, I mean, I guess social media gives us an opportunity to show a different side of us as well, which in terms of them seeing representation, and websites can sometimes be quite corporate, and it's quite difficult to be able to persuade people to put certain things possibly on a website, whereas actually doing a TikTok and doing an Instagram and having students and trainees who actually are already either studying with us as a college or already working at your organizations from those different backgrounds, different experiences with different accents, all of those kind of real people, real faces, real human experiences, I guess, all help students feel like they can imagine themselves being there and being in the profession. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Puneet, anything for you to add to this?
I think just picking up on a couple of the things that Alice has said, there is a thing here about transparency in terms of what are we trying to assess here, and making sure that all candidates are really clear on what the expectations are, so it doesn't feel like a secret or a trick or, you know, something that you'll only know if you happen to know people who are within the sector, within the organization. And we've been having a couple of conversations with clients around, should we share our interview questions in advance? And that's a really interesting one. And actually, I don't know the answer to that, because part of what I think firms are trying to test is someone's ability to think on their feet, right? But actually, is there a better way to do that than asking them really, really challenging, you know, off the cuff, totally wacky interview questions? I don't know the answer to that. But I think these are the conversations that firms need to be having about, what is it we're actually looking to assess here? And are we assessing it in the best way, or in a way that levels the playing field? I think there is also a point here around getting your data together. And that's something that I think a lot of people put in the camp of, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of resource, which isn't necessarily true. I think there are little things that firms can be doing to start tracking, even if you're thinking, God, we can't buy a big system to do this, you can start tracking little bits and pieces, looking at, who is applying to us and where are they falling out of our process. And you can do that on quite a basic level, but at least you're starting to get a sense of actually what are really our problems here. Because if you're seeing that nobody from a social mobility background is applying to you, that's a problem. But actually, if what you're seeing is we're having quite a few people apply to us, but no one's getting through our, psychometric test, then that's a different problem. So I think there is something here around getting your data in order, even things around kind of, to Alice's point about thinking about where you're advertising, thinking about where you're marketing. So we launched an applicant tracking system a couple of years ago, and what we've got in that is the ability for people to have a list of this is where we advertise, but then cut that with social mobility data. So the candidates who are applying to us who have one social mobility flag, what resources are they going to find out this information, and do we need to spend a bit more money or time on those? And then one step further, the candidates we're hiring who come from a social mobility background, where are they going for their information, and do we need to spend a bit more time? But I think there's such value in data gathering that will then go on to inform a lot of decisions that I think firms are taking around recruitment, selection, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, in terms of thinking about the kind of early stages, obviously there's a question in the chat from Deborah, and it says, I can see the benefit, but struggling to get stakeholders to see it. So how is Browne Jacobson approach that in terms of the wider organisation, not just the recruitment team or the HR team?
In terms of approaching social mobility?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll try and be as concise as I can because there's a lot of good stuff here. So I think, there are some very well documented business/commercial reasons for why you should focus on social mobility. Just as part, we all know more diverse businesses are more profitable. It's a very well documented fact. So there's that alone. I mean, sort of tying some of the things together already. We started the conversation saying the legal sector is changing, and it definitely is. I've debated this with a few people over the last few years, whether it's carrot or stick. I don't mind, because change is changing and it's changing well. But actually, clients are really driving a lot of law firms to make a difference. 40% of a bid or a tender now within a law, kind of contract is actually show us what you're doing to improve diversity. Law firms who don't focus on diversity will become extinct, I think, very quickly, because the clients will just take the business elsewhere. There is a genuine, as I said, that is a bit of a stick if you're not doing something. But as I said, we've been lucky enough that we were ahead of the curve quite some way on some of the areas because we were doing it quite organically. So when clients started asking, actually, over the last couple of years, what are you doing? Again, if there's a commercial reason, we have won a lot of work as a result of clients wanting to work with us. I put my day job hat on, which is head of resourcing, so I have to recruit, through my team, everybody who works at the firm. It's somewhere between 32 and 38%, but it's a sizable amount of the next generation will not work for a business that doesn't show its ESG credentials and social mobility credentials. So you're going to have a talent problem if you don't start focusing on this. Now, I appreciate that is a bit of a stick. You want people to organically say, look, the carrot here is that, it is the right thing to do. As I said, from us, some of the most incredible conversations we've had with clients, some of the best opportunities around reciprocal work experience programs have sprung up as a result of conversations around social mobility. Show me a law firm whose clients, or show me a business whose clients and the areas that they operate represent, something different than a really nice mix of societal backgrounds. That's what we should be aiming for. That's why it's important.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's just prompted a question, so I'll keep going with this for 1 second. So, Alice, there's a question about clients' views of maintaining trust in firms who have workers from a lower social class.
Interesting question. Absolutely, I do not think that this is remotely an issue. I mean, I think it's the complete opposite, certainly in my experience, when I've participated in tenders or pitching for new work. Many clients want to know what the firm is doing to improve diversity and inclusion and social mobility, because those are things that are on the agendas of every business across different industries and sectors, not just within the legal profession. And clients want to work with lawyers that align to their values. I think gone are the days where there's that sort of old school connection or old university connection. I think clients now want to work with good businesses that have underlying values to do better and to do the right thing. And certainly I am seeing diversity and inclusion coming up more and more in terms of tender requests, panel requests, those types of processes for winning new work. So no, I don't think that clients not having trust in people from a lower social class is a problem at all.
Yeah,
Can
I
I
think
just
go on. Yes, sure.
Can I just add something to that? I do think where trust becomes an issue is where firms say they have X, or they put people in the tenders to say, look, we've got this one partner who's from this background, but that partner never appears in the actual work. That's where trust becomes an issue, actually, because in the bid to win the work, firms pull out all the stops, and those stops aren't necessarily broadly representative. You know, and we do hear situations where people say to us, once they've gone into their law firms, you know, they ask me to talk at X, Y, and Z things because of my background, but I never get put on the best deals. Now, that's where trust will get lost, both with clients, but also with your employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose it's about making sure that everybody has those opportunities, that it isn't just seen as a tick box exercise. And that's the danger. I think it's, rather than saying we are doing this because we want to be seen to be doing it, making sure that you are clear that you're doing it because it's the right thing and because it is, it's the best thing for the business.
Absolutely, thank you. We're just going to move on to thinking about attraction, which is really thinking about the different recruitment activities, I guess student recruitment activities, trainee recruitment activities that different firms, organisations carry out. So Jane, maybe just coming to you, I mean, there was various different research showing that very, very small minority of students who were on free school meals went to certain universities. There's a big disparity from the Bridge Group's research, in the Bridge Group's research as well, that looks at different students from different backgrounds, and the likelihood of students attending some of the top law schools is very, very much lower if you're from a low socioeconomic background. So what should firms be thinking about, I guess, when they are thinking about their recruitment activities within the sector and looking at the different universities?
Okay, I'll home in one what might seem like a small detail, but in my experience, it's one of the biggest hurdles that students have to overcome, and it always comes up, and it's the application forms. And so unless you're tenacious, you have time, which means having spare time, not time that you spend having to top up your income. Application forms take forever, and I would ask firms to question whether they really need all those questions and what are they doing with them. It does feel like a barrier. If a student can't be bothered filling it out, then they're not for us. There's very good reasons why students often don't fill them out. And I mean, I've taught students with the classroom, one will go, I've done 150 applications, another one, oh no, I can beat that, I've done 200 and been rejected. So that's the very first hurdle that a lot of them can't even get over because it's so time consuming and demoralizing. So yeah.
And I guess it's more likely that these students are very time poor as well, because they're in all likelihood working alongside their study as well. They don't have as much time to spend going to various events, filling in hundreds of application forms. They're very much less likely to be able to do that. Tom, from your experience, what's worked for Browne Jacobson?
So just a couple of stats out there. So I joined 2016. We used to be 100% in our junior intakes, 100% exclusively from Russell Group. You had a 2-1 or an A and 2Bs with a requirement to get in. I walked in pretty much sort of day one. It happened to be around graduate recruitment season, having previously at my last 2 companies taken off the graduate entry criteria. So removed you needed a degree, but It could be any classification. We didn't even look at A-levels. We obviously work with Rare and Puneet's team around contextualised recruitment, which works fantastically. We do completely anonymised recruitment as well. We've talked about being open in the process, so we do share every exercise we do, every written exercise, every interview question. It doesn't really, it's not giving an advantage, it's just removing the disadvantage for those who may have never done it before. Fast forward to 2022/2023, we're now 65% non-Russell Group and 35% Russell Group. Over 60% of offers, training contract offers recently went to students who previously wouldn't even be able to apply because they had a first, but they had 3 C's, or they had an A and 2 B's, and they had a 2-2. So removing of academic criteria, I'm yet to meet somebody, I'm sure there's probably someone out there, I'm yet to meet anybody in nearly 22 years of doing this that can show me that academics will translate to someone who is very, very good on the job. There's no relevance. So for me, it's back to what we talked about earlier, recruit and select against things that are going to be relevant to the job. So I think, there's some clear statistics from us that it just doesn't make a difference. 1 in 5, so 20% of our partners, the most successful people at our firm, have a 2-2. Pre-2016, they wouldn't have been able to apply for their own graduate programme. That can't possibly be right because they're very talented people.
So I guess there may be a nervousness around removing that criteria and what you replace it with that's perhaps harder to measure or test in an application or recruitment process, because that's a kind of hard fact, an academic grade. It's easy to decide if someone gets that or not. So in terms of replacing that into something that's either more subjective or more skills based, or Puneet, we've talked about contextualized recruitment. Tell us what it is.
So contextualized recruitment, well, our contextualized recruitment looks at 2 separate things. So first is a measure of disadvantage, which I've talked about, and that's broken down by those 3 categories. The second is a measure of academic outperformance. And this is an interesting one in the context of A-level grades and GCSE grades, because to do that, we have to ask the students, what did you get for GCSE and what did you get for A-level and which school did you go to? Because from that data, what we're able to do for employers is give them an outperformance score. And so what we're doing is we're looking at what that student achieved and comparing that to the average grades in the year that they did those exams from the school that they attended in that year. And so we're saying to teams, okay, this person got X, let's just say A and 2 B's from a school where the average was 3 D's. And that metric, and then we get lots of people saying to us, but we don't have an A-level requirement, we don't have a GCSE requirement. That's absolutely fine, because at that point, it's not about whether the candidate got 3 B's or 3 A's or 3 C's. It's about the context in which they achieved that. And, 3 B's from a school where the average is 3 A stars is very, very different to 3 B's from a school where the average is, 2 E's. And that's a really, really powerful metric. And I'll be honest, the feedback we get from partners is great because it's a data point. And I think if one thing that I've learned from working in law firms is that partners really are fans of data points. And so I think the power of having that as a data point, because I think what can be challenging for people like Tom who are trying to make change is having those conversations. But I think having that additional data point around, look, it's not about whether the candidate got this, because what we're seeing is this person showing huge potential from the age of 16 upwards. And so those are 2 data points that we've seen a lot of firms not replace their A-level requirements with, but use quite heavily when they are removing their kind of academic benchmarks for A-level and or GCSE.
Yeah, absolutely. So for yourself, it's about it is about understanding where they are and how you compare that to their peers and where they've grown up and where they've seen it. In terms of the application form perspective that Jane's raised, so Andrea has said that he completely agrees with the length of the application forms, and there are alternative ways to screen and assess applicants. So are there other things in that application process, and thinking about the lengthy application form, that the panel would like to share?
I think I'd certainly echo what has been said about application forms, and I think there are a number of barriers with them. It's not necessarily always about not wanting to fill them out. It is that students or from lower socioeconomic backgrounds can't. That they may have jobs, they may have caring responsibilities, they don't have the time to be able to sit down and invest. And equally, understanding exactly what they need to write to tick the right boxes might not be something that's been explained to them in the same way as somebody who has got friends or family that are able to help them and proofread. So I think we do need to be revisiting how application processes work. I think blind contextualized recruitment is a good idea, but again, the assessment will still come back to questions. So even taking away where somebody went to school, their grades, where they went to uni is helpful, I think, in leveling the playing field, but you are still being asked to answer a set of questions that some people, the reality is, will have been prepped to do more, to be able to do that better than others. So I think we need to be thinking very critically about how we can design assessments that level the playing field. And I come back to video content about potentially video interviews or conversations rather than focusing too much on what people are able to write down. And I think the other point is around training assessors. So obviously many people on this call will be the people involved in designing those assessments, but making sure that the people who are doing that scoring understand the importance of looking for skills and potential, not particular grades or qualifications.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alice. Tom, there was quite a big question that we were asked about this, which was how do firms run a more effective and more efficient recruitment process to support social mobility? So
I mean, strangely enough, I don't think those two things go together. I don't think you can be efficient and effective. And I just listened to what Alice was saying, which is absolutely perfect. My team hate me in one sense, in that what we do. So again, my background, so having been at Tesco looking after the graduate programs there, you know, and we would get 20, 30,000 applications, you know, you're talking mega sort of scale applications. You know, when I first started, going back 12, 13 years, but it was, okay, put a grade requirement on, chop them down, do some online tests, chop it down further. And it was literally the HR team's kind of anything to get that number from there to there, which is clearly not best practice. So actually what we do is, you know, we're just in the process actually of revising, and we've got a big project going on for completing October, November this year with a company called Amberjack to do a complete refresh of our materials and a total shift to a potential model. But actually what we've done for the last few years, and it's made an almighty difference, is if we get 600 applications for training contracts, about 400, maybe just over 400 of those will get to the telephone interview stage, which is an almighty undertaking. You know, my team are doing 30, 40, 50 telephone interviews a week. We will never do video interviews. I think I've got a bit of I'd say it's even beyond a sort of pet hate. It's something I have never felt comfortable with doing, where somebody could just talk into a computer, be recorded. If only, not only because I think that probably does add to some discrimination, I think as well, I mean, that doesn't give you the chance to sell your company. You know, why would you do that? Why would you just take and not give anything? And what we've seen is the quality of the conversations, you know, a 25, 30-minute telephone interview with 400 students. If we're not sure about something, it gives us the chance to prompt. Whereas if it is just written or it is recorded, you can't go back on what's been said. You can't probe to get any more from it. And I think, you know, you have to be fair and give somebody a proper chance at saying, answer my question. Here's what we're looking for. You haven't quite nailed it. Can you just expand a bit more? That for us has been game changing, but it's an almighty undertaking for my team, but it's so worth it. So worth it.
Yeah. And oddly enough, by doing that by phone, as opposed to pre-recorded video, you're removing their concerns around their environment and various other aspects that could be barriers for them as well. It's a phone call.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I think, you know, I might get shot down for saying this, but I think more often than not, the poor recruitment processes are, okay, what works for us, what's efficient for the HR team or the early careers team, what makes our life easier, without thinking actually what's the right thing, both for your business and for the student, because it's things that just aren't an effective way of getting the right talent through. But that's only my opinion.
Thank you. Thanks. And Jane, there was a question about how do we increase confidence from those from a low socioeconomic background in terms of applying, in terms of these recruitment processes, and their confidence when they go through them.
Yeah, no, confidence is everything in an interview, and it can be quite intangible. So how do you build confidence with these students? Some of it's picking up on what's already been discussed. I completely agree about the telephone conversations. I also think you could translate it to Zoom, because you can put on a Zoom background, and because the college is wholly virtual, we do all our interviews by Zoom. And I have to say I'm a complete convert, because it just gets rid of all the chatter around the edges, the distracting things. It's not quite the same worry about what to wear, etc. So I think there's things around there that you can do to increase confidence. You have to be relatable. Picked that up already, so that students recognise what they're coming into. Little things, perhaps doing a small podcast before explaining what an interview would look like, including most law firms have designed reception areas to strike awe into their client, but they're hugely intimidating for someone who's just come out of university or not even out of university. So you just perhaps presenting that to them, explaining who's going to meet them, what the process looks like. We take that for granted. Somebody who's not been in an office has perhaps not gone up a glass lift or whatever. It's just so off-putting before they're interviewed. So lots of little things like that that go unnoticed can really build up confidence, and students can anticipate, or potential the interviewees know what it's going to be like. Whether it goes as far as telling them the questions is a very contentious issue, but I could see the benefit of that as well.
Thank you. Puneet, just come to you now. I mean, we've got a question here from Debbie about psychometric testing. I don't know if that's something that you look at Rare.
It's not something that we do, but it's a question we get asked a lot about the impact of psychometric testing on candidates from diverse backgrounds. And there's a difference between what I know and what I think. Do I categorically know what the impact is across all firms on psychometric testing? No. Do I know that we have had a couple of firms who use our applicant tracking system who, when running their adverse impact report, have seen that candidates with one social mobility flag or more are falling out of that psychometric testing phase at a higher rate than other candidates? Yes, I do. There's a lot of conversations about psychometric testing and the impact of that on all diverse groups, not just people from social mobility background. So I'd come back to my thing about get on top of your data. If you're going to make any change in your recruitment process, really look at what it looked like before and what it looks like afterwards to ensure that the change you're making is doing the thing you want to do. And so Amberjack, the company that Tom referenced, we work with them a fair amount, and I know they put a lot of time and effort into testing, ensuring, monitoring the data about who is going through their test and what's happening to those people, so that when they're talking to clients, they can also talk about, we've looked at adverse impact against these groups. So I don't know the answer to the question in terms of really what the overall impact is on people from social mobility backgrounds, because it's a big data set that you need to look at to say, like, who's getting through these. But I think the same thing applies as it does for interviewing, right? There are going to be certain groups who just have more access to people, for example, who've done these kind of tests, or who have more access to people in the profession so they can ask them questions about, if you were going to design a psychometric test as a lawyer, what would you put in there? And I think that kind of applies to psychometric testing in the same way it does to interviewing or application forms.
Okay, thank you. Tom, I don't know if you want to add to that. And you've also got a question about your approach on telephone calls rather than face-to-face meetings or video calls.
I can't see the question, so I don't know what that one is.
So it says, why do you do 20 to 30 minute phone interviews, not face-to-face meetings or video calls?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't physically be possible, I don't think. Well, of course it would be, but I think, particularly if you've got somebody from a lower socioeconomic background, the cost of attending an interview, getting from wherever they may be, and they could be anywhere. We don't feel it would add the cost incurred for potentially the candidate, wouldn't add anything, I don't think, to doing it face to face. So yeah, I think that's why we wouldn't do it face to face. Sorry if I got the rest of the question.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. I think that's really helpful. Hopefully that's helped looking at the recruitment process. I'm going to move on to the SQE just momentarily. There's obviously been various different reports that have come through. I don't know how aware people are of the attainment gaps that are coming through in terms of the SQE candidates so far, but there are definitely particular groups of candidates who are struggling more in the SQE than others. Certainly different ethnic minority groups and Black British candidates are definitely not performing as well at the present in the SQE, for example. So just to reflect a moment on the SQE before we start looking at thinking about that development and progression. Jane, what are we seeing at the moment at the college in terms of social mobility, students' opportunities that the SQE is giving them?
It's still very early days in terms of SQE, but I think the biggest shift, I know the biggest shift is qualifying work experience and the fact it can be peppered throughout your studies. So it's got rid of that bottleneck that the LPC created, where students were getting through the LPC and then they were stuck. They couldn't get a training contract. And some of that may have been down to the fact they perhaps didn't interview as well, that there was too many coming out in that particular area and too few contracts to be chased. So that's definitely got rid of that bottleneck. The only question I have is whether it's pushing it further down the line, in that they're now qualified, so newly qualified, but how will their careers progress after that? And I think it's too early to form a judgment on that. Interesting enough, with SQE, the apprenticeship route produces fantastic results in terms of pass rates. And I think that intuitively, perhaps we know that, but that closer inspection as to how and the profile under there would be really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. And the initial report that's come out from the University of Exeter suggested that some of the gaps around certain ethnic minority groups are coming through due to social mobility. And I guess the panel won't be surprised to hear in terms of the intersectionality between those two aspects of the different groups that are very much underrepresented in the candidate population. So just a couple of the things that have really affected the possibility to achieve and perform in the SQE that are coming through. It's interesting, the positive and negative experiences that they're having of both their legal education journey or their professional journey. The students' belief, which is really interesting, in how they feel they might succeed in the profession, their belief, not the reality. Their belief that the profession is elitist or there's privilege, and their belief in the barriers, and whether they've actually experienced rejection and discrimination as well. They're very much coming across as different factors that actually the candidates who perform less well, they're actually seeing through the SQE, which I guess isn't a surprise, but it kind of reaffirms, I guess, some of the experiences that they're facing, not just in the SQE, but more broadly. Alice, in terms of the SQE and what you've seen kind of with the regional firms at the Law Society, or from your experience, have you seen any positive factors yet around the SQE as an opportunity?
I think the SQE in theory has got a huge amount of potential to equalise opportunities. It gives people the chance to obtain work experience in different ways, which can help them then to reach qualification. I think many firms that I've seen are working out how the SQE will fit into their way of training solicitors at the moment. And I think firms are at different stages with their processes. I think the real danger, and something that we all need to be mindful of, is that we don't want to end up with a two-tier workforce, where firms who are putting their trainees through tailored prep courses and doing something which is very similar to a traditional training contract, where students who have trained through that route are seen as kind of on a higher level to those who have got bits of qualifying work experience from other areas. So I think we just need to be mindful of that, I think, as we move through and as the SQE becomes more widespread, to make sure that people are not disadvantaged because of how they've got their qualifying work experience, and that we do what we can to shift those perceptions if they exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I was interviewing the last couple of days for our scholarships, the SQE scholarships, and there were definitely students there. And I was like, would you like to take the masters and the electives? And there's a master's loan that would make a massive impact to people's ability to study. But equally, electives were so far away from where they were. They were working, they were struggling to fund their study. Like the luxury of being able to take some electives if you don't need to, or to be able to choose your next work experience, rather than actually they're working as a paralegal, they like their firm, they're in this particular practice area, they're doing well. They're just not factors that these students can necessarily think about. Their ambition obviously is they need to take their SQ1 and 2, and that's where they'll go, and hopefully that they'll pass those and end up as a solicitor. But they weren't thinking about what else could I do? How do I get the variety of work experience I might get as a training contract? They would love to have done, but it wasn't up there as a priority for them to be considering. Tom, in terms of the move to SQE for Browne Jacobson, how have you been using that to help enhance, I guess, and improve your social mobility initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, we've just got our first cohort started on the SQE. I mean, from our side, we have a very diverse firm anyway, but certainly at the junior levels, it's we've got a lot of diversity, so it is a concern for us. Certainly from an ethnic minority perspective, Black, Asian, ethnic minority, we have a high percentage within the cohort, and so to see that might impact their chances of success is a concern, and obviously something we're monitoring closely. One thing we are doing, as I said, ours is a 3-year sort of program, so to speak. 1 year is dedicated to study, but you're actually paid a full-time wage. You're paid a full training rate to study, which is incredible, because for us, we need to clear as many possible hurdles out the way for them to focus on that study, knowing that could be the difference between that, having to get over the hurdle that might have artificially been put in their way because of the backgrounds. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for us, is that we're properly funding it. They shouldn't have, they won't need to work during study. So it is focus on the study, do the best possible chances of setting them up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that you take their employment, you take on very early in their career journey as well. It's not just a maintenance grant, off you go, we'll see you at the end of your SQE, come back to us when you've passed. It's very much, actually, we're wanting to invest in you right from that beginning, and you're our responsibility for us to look after you, support you, develop you. That comes right from the beginning. Tom, is that fair to say?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. So we'll move on to that kind of entering the workplace aspect for those candidates, for those trainees from a lower socioeconomic background. Puneet, from your perspective, what's really key to help support those new employees, particularly the ones that are kind of more junior, coming into the workplace, and supporting them as they start with the firm?
So I was saying to someone this morning, it's funny, because if you'd asked me that question pre-COVID, I think my answer would have been quite different, actually, because a big thing at the moment is balancing having this flexible hybrid working world with ensuring people, particularly at the junior end, and particularly from backgrounds where they perhaps aren't used to being in those environments, how balancing kind of the flexibility with making sure they're getting, one, the support, but two, the ability to really learn by osmosis that comes from sharing a physical office space with somebody. And so that's something that I think is quite high on the agenda for lots and lots of firms, thinking about, as trainees, what do we now mean by supervision? What parameters are we putting in place to ensure they're getting that, supervision, that training, that ability to learn, not just how to kind of be a lawyer, but how to be someone in a world of work, whatever that means in this day and age. So I think it's ensuring that you have things in place that really get the balance between, like I said, the support, the training, but also giving people that flexibility that they're looking for. I think there is also a thing about learning from best practice where firms have had success in other areas of diversity. And so I was talking again to someone else this morning about actually the fact that when we look at adverse impact in the recruitment process in relation to ethnicity, what we've seen from some of the data that we've got is that for Black candidates, actually, the proportions stay fairly consistent from the point of application through to the point of training contract offer. And actually, what best practice can you learn from how you've achieved that and apply it to social mobility? Because I think there is opportunity here. Like I said, I think when the legal sector decides it wants to do something, it does it properly. So I think there's a lot of learning and opportunity to learn from both within your own firm, but looking externally. And how do you apply things that have been successful to other areas of diversity, including social mobility?
Yeah, thank you. Alice, you mentioned this at the beginning about the opportunity to progress, to come into the workplace and then progress. What would you like to add in terms of the areas of development and opportunity for these young lawyers?
Yeah, lots of things, really. I think the comments that we've made around outreach recruitment all stand true through the legal journey, really, in terms of assuming nothing and being transparent. So I think there's a few things that would be really important to consider. First of all, career pathways. So making sure that you are transparent as a firm about what the options are that are available and how somebody can get there, that it isn't always obvious what partnership means or what it takes to get to partnership, or what you can do if you don't want to be a partner. But unless you understand those options, then it's going to be very difficult for you to work out your path. I think the other thing that's important is making sure that you invest time in developing soft skills for junior lawyers. Now, often the focus will be on you need to bill X number of hours, that the key thing is meeting those targets, developing your technical knowledge. And yes, that's important. But ultimately, in order to get to the highest ranks in a law firm, you need those soft skills, the presentation skills, networking, business development, and making sure that people can become comfortable with those things at an early stage in their career can really help them then when those things start to matter. So examples I've seen of good practice are training courses that are focused specifically on networking, impact and influencing, presentation skills, how to build your personal brand. All of those things can be really helpful. And I think assuming nothing in terms of legal jargon as well and how law firms operate on a day-to-day basis. I always go back to this example, but very early on in my training contract, I had my first review in my first seat, and my supervisor said to me, well, you must have been very busy for the last few months because you never sent a capacity email. And I said, what on earth does that mean? Like, I've got no idea what you're talking about here. And the concept that you needed to email specific people if you wanted work, for me that had never worked in that legal environment, wasn't something that I grasped because everybody had got their heads down. They all looked really busy. I didn't want to disturb them. So those types of things can have a real impact on somebody's progression. If nobody had told me that within the first couple of years, I might have gone through and just not seemed interested, or people thought, yeah, that you weren't enthusiastic. But breaking down those barriers, assuming nothing in terms of what people know, both about the day-to-day operation of the firm and what you need to do in order to get to the next stage, I think can be really helpful. And investing that time in soft skills development, in mentoring and coaching, will get those people along the way and make them see what they can attain and how they can attain it.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Tom, would you like to add to that in terms of your induction process?
Yeah, just as I said, you have to have the bespoke elements, and I mean, Alice has kind of properly hit the nail on the head. Assume nothing. It's better to assume nothing and say, oh, actually, I already know that, that's fine, than to not have that that conversation. But as I said, it's got to go two ways. You have to set the candidate up for success as best as you can. They will only be open with you if you can create an environment that's welcoming, where they can feel that they can be their whole true self, for want of a better cliche. And it's also with the supervisor as well, making sure the supervisor understands, look, here are likely some of the challenges that may or may not be there, but these are often some of the challenges faced by someone from a lower socioeconomic background. Having a buddy program where possible, having a social mobility community is something that's very, very important, so that people feel that they can go to people outside of the line manager, the local direct teams, and have a safe conversation. So look, actually, you know, the hell's this? You know, I don't know what on earth I'm doing. Can you help me? Because they're potentially unlikely to have that network outside of work. So yeah, as I said, what Alice said is absolutely spot on. Assume nothing. As soon as you do that, you fall into the trap of overlooking something that could be critically important to their future prospects.
Thank you. A question for you in the chat, Tom. So just to clarify from Emma, in addition to fully funding the SQE, you provide a maintenance fund too. I just want to know a little bit more detail about how you fund and support your...
Yeah, we don't offer a maintenance. We just pay them a wage. So so for 3 years. So typically, you know, as it used to be, if it was a 2-year training contract, you'd go off and do your LPC. Here's $5 grand or whatever it was. You know, kind of see you in 12 months type thing. For us, they are fully paid. I'll keep the figure to myself, but I think it's probably around 30-ish K. For 3 years, they're paid that to study.
Yeah,
so
as well as funding their SQE training. Yes. And
yeah, that's it exactly. Yeah, it's the exams and the fees and the obviously prep courses all paid for by the firm. They then get a wage that allows them to be effectively, their job is to be is to study for 12 months.
Thank you. Any more questions for the panel? Please do add them in. We're coming towards the end of the session now, so I'm keen that you have an opportunity to ask questions. There's another one here for you, Tom, if you don't mind. When recruiting, do students get exposure to people with similar backgrounds working at the firm, people who are relatable to them?
It's a good question. I mean, so we do a huge amount of outreach and advocacy work. I'd probably go so far as to say 92 out of 100 students will talk about the work that they've seen us do over the last few years in social mobility, and particularly, you know, it's very authentic. You know, they're not sort of saying it because they think that's what we want to hear. They are aware of what we are doing. Throughout the recruitment process, as I said, we are an incredibly small team, albeit over 60% of my own team are from a lower socioeconomic background. Will they get exposure to someone during the recruitment, if that is the question? We have a mix. So I'm not sure if I'm overthinking that question or not. Just read the question again, sorry, because I can't see it.
So it's about both the exposure to people with similar backgrounds and the people who are relatable to them. So I suppose that's what they were asking. I don't know whether that's necessarily within your team or others.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the process, I mean, yeah, we put on a huge amount of events where they will be able to access somebody from any different backgrounds, you know, whatever the community might be, whether it's, you know, the Disability Network, LGBTQ, you know, we have the Reach Mentor, the Reach program as well. So they will have opportunity to discuss a career at Browne Jacobson with somebody from their own similar background. During the recruitment process, we make it extremely clear that we have a very balanced set of assessors. So throughout the telephone interviews and the assessment day itself, they're very likely to find somebody that they can have a conversation with from their background. Whether that person then interviews them, I don't think we get into that. We don't get into that level of detail yet.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go around the panel now and just ask maybe one or two things that you'd like to either say that you've said previously or something we haven't mentioned that you think that would make the biggest difference to a firm's social mobility initiatives in terms of what they should be thinking about or putting in place. Jane, from your perspective, what do you think the 2 or 3 priorities should be?
Oh, I think it's just from talking to students, it's the little things. It really is. So, well, maybe it's not such a little thing, the application form that I mentioned, that just so many of them stall at. It's also demoralising for them. Think about it at that little podcast I mentioned. If you're inviting them into the office, maybe just set it out what it's going to look like. taught them to the steps. There's a fine line between being patronising and reassuring and getting rid of anxieties. I saw it done recently and I thought it worked really well and was very welcome. So I think those were my 2 top tips.
Puneet?
Totally unsurprisingly, get your data together. Look, without facts, it's really hard to make any. It's not even that, it's really hard to measure it. So when you're looking back, like, it's great that Tom could come here and say, this day in 2016, this was the situation. This day in 2023, this is the situation. He can only do that if he's got his data together, right? And it's really hard to measure change, measure success, but also I think convince a partnership of something if you don't have the data to back it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Alice, I was just seeing, I've just been distracted. There's a question, which is great. So I love questions. So let's do this. Alice, before you come to your couple of things, there's a question about soft skills development and social capital, which has been heavily impacted by COVID, and particularly for those socially mobile applicants. What can law firms do to address this gap to help with that soft skills development and social capital?
Yeah, interesting question, because COVID, I think, because there have been less opportunities for people to network, to build those relationships, to just be around other people, I think that has had a knock-on impact in confidence, both among students and junior lawyers. So I think the starting point really is to find those opportunities for people to come together and just get used to being in those settings with others, whether that is online events or whether it is an in-person insight evening or a training session. Those opportunities can really just get people talking to each other again. And I think that that's the first step then to helping to build those skills. I think in terms of social mobility and progression, again, I think it's about being mindful of unconscious bias, that when everybody's working from home, when everybody's in their own locations, you may find that the work goes to the person that somebody thinks of first, or that people who don't have that confidence, who aren't so able, or who don't feel able to put themselves out there, are losing out on opportunities just because they're not being contacted. So perhaps thinking about how you can include those systems for work allocation within team practices to make sure that everybody is getting the same exposure and having universal systems, universal training programs, which potentially are not team specific, we think could be very helpful as well.
Thank you. And just quickly, Alice, just to wrap up, but your 1 or 2 things you'd like to see firms doing if they can in this space?
Yeah, 1 or 2 things. First thing I would say is social mobility doesn't stop when somebody gets a training contract. That often initiatives are focused around that outreach and recruitment stage. There's a whole journey to go. So when you're thinking about social mobility, think about the whole legal journey. Don't just think about getting people into the firm, but what are we going to do to make sure they are welcomed and able to progress once they're there? And second thing, I've said it many times, is assume nothing. Really do think carefully about whether somebody will know what you are talking about. Thank
you. And Tom, just to finish with your piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost what everyone else said. I mean, without doubt, if you can track your data, you might be surprised what it actually already shows you. You may well have made good progress that you weren't aware of. So start with your data, because as I said, one of the biggest challenges you hear everyone saying is, how do I convince my stakeholders? As Puneet said, it's that data is absolutely gold. So make sure you've got your data. And I have to just push the recruitment piece. Ask yourself, look at your process and ask yourself, does every step in this add value, or actually is it harming what you're doing? If it does, you know what you need to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. When we share this recording, please do share it far and wide with others in your firm, as you're talking about kind of how to get stakeholders on board. And also I will share the Social Mobility Foundation's kind of report from the index from last year, because it has a whole host of examples of good practice. The index, I think, may have just closed for this year, but it's a way in which firms can measure themselves, see how they're doing, get feedback from the team at the Social Mobility foundation and see how they can improve. So it's definitely a resource that is helpful for everyone. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure the panelists won't mind me saying that you'd be happy to be put in touch with people, or if anyone wants to talk to you, I'll pop your LinkedIn's maybe on an email around to everyone as well. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.